Welcome back to another episode, a brand new episode of the Total Sports Live podcast. This is Jovan Alford, and I'll be joined shortly. Well, I came to say joined shortly. You know who I'm here. I'm here with Harrison Brown, and we're going to talk about everything about the 2022 NFL Draft, which you don't know. It's actually only a couple days away as we're doing this recording. It's Thursday night. Draft weekend is here. Not a lot of hype around the surrounding the draft, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of great prospects in this year's class, specifically for the Eagles and everybody else across the NFL. So we're going to talk about that on today's show. But before we even do all that, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Total Sports Live and checking out the podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Anchor.fm, iHeartRadio, I guess, wherever Anchor pushes out this podcast to. Make sure you check it out. TSL, TSL podcast, Total Sports Live. Just search it, hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate everybody that checks us out. Hit the follow button on Spotify. I think you can leave, ratings now on Spotify. So hey, if you want to go ahead and do that for us, we really appreciate you taking some time out today to tune in to the pod. So like I said, we got a good show for you, and always joining me on the pod is none other than my guy Harrison. Harrison, we're finally back in the podcast booth. It's been a minute actually since we've done a podcast. I want to think it was like a couple months ago, right? I think it was a couple months ago, talking about some draft prospects. And I think it was the Sixers podcast when we talked about them trading for James Harden. So it's been a minute. So people got to bear with us a little bit, but we're back in the podcast seat. And what else best to talk about on our first pod in a minute than the 2022 NFL Draft?
Man, it's great to be back. And like you said, I mean, I can't think of a better way to come back than talking about this draft class. I think there's a bad narrative about this class right now, but I think there's a lot of guys in it, a lot of guys who are going to be real good players on Sunday. So we got a lot to go over today. So I say let's get right into it.
Yeah, most definitely. Let's definitely get into it. We mentioned this year's draft class, and we got to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. And the Eagles, they come into this draft originally with 3 picks, but now they have 2 first round picks and overall 10 throughout the 7th round draft. They traded a pick to the New Orleans Saints, kind of flip flopping picks. So the Eagles have numbers 15 and 18, while the Saints now have number 16 and number 19. They didn't have 16 originally, so that went to there from the Eagles. And the Eagles, I think, also picked up a pick, 2023 first round pick in next year's draft, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. So they definitely picked that up as well. So Eagles in great shape. 2 first round picks, Harrison, but I don't think people realize that they're in a great spot to dictate what happens in the second half of this first round on Thursday night, right? Everybody's worrying about the top 10 and seeing how the board's going to shake out there. But at number 15, the Eagles can kind of dictate, where they can go and how the rest of the board shakes out. Eagles and the Saints pretty much can see how everything else shakes out. So that being said, first question for today's pod: who do you think the Eagles should select with their first two picks in the draft at 15 and 18? There's a lot of great picks players that should be on the board there. A lot of areas of need that the Eagles could also address with those 2 picks. What do you say if you were Eagles GM Howie Roseman?
It's interesting, and it's risky to say this. I don't want to jinx it, but it feels like they can't go wrong. It does kind of feel like that. It feels like there's going to be enough guys there between the 15th and 18th pick. They should get 2 really good players that can help this football team move forward. Now, there's a couple different things they could do. They could go, we've kind of seen it a lot. A lot of people are projecting receiver. This will be the 3rd year in a row they've selected a receiver. There's some hesitancy there, but it's definitely a position they need. They could go receiver and defense. They could go defense and defense. If it's me, I kind of want to address both sides of the ball. I want to get someone for the offense, for Jalen Hurts, kind of open the field up a little bit. And that could be someone like Jamison Williams from Alabama, obviously coming off that ACL injury. That might give teams some pause. Another guy that I really like that I've been high on throughout the process is Treylon Burks out of Arkansas. I think he's a really interesting prospect. The way he can move at 225 pounds, the things he can do. The amount of high volume opportunities he got at Arkansas, they were looking to get him the ball a bunch of different ways. So I think he could be
Hmm.
someone really interesting for the Eagles. Complement Devontae really well. Devontae's that speed guy, that number one target. Treylon Burks could come in here and do some really interesting things, make some contested catches, get some short yardage situations where he's getting the ball. So I wouldn't hate that. On the defensive side of the ball, I really like Nakobe Dean, and recently there's been a little bit of a trend on him sliding. I think that the Eagles would definitely get a really good player there if they picked him at 15 or 18. That Georgia defense, you really can't go wrong with the Georgia defense for any team. I mean, there's so many guys from that defense that are going to be NFL, really good players. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm kind of at the linebacker and receiver mode. There's a couple guys that I think if they fall to 15, you really can't let them slide. I'm really high on Jermaine Johnson, defensive end out of Florida State. I think that if he's there at 15, really tough to pass him up. Kind of the same thing with Jameson Williams. If he was there at 15, really tough to pass him up. So, like I said, don't want to risk it, but kind of feel like they can't go wrong.
Yeah, like you said, at 15 and 18, like you said, they really can't go wrong. They can't make, the bad pick unless it's like something like Mike Mamula, right? Like you just go like completely, off that realm. But where they say that, like you said, they're in a great spot. You mentioned a guy like Treylon Burks, this is a guy that had a fantastic season for the Arkansas Razorbacks. If people didn't have a chance to watch the Razorbacks with him and a quarterback KJ Jefferson this season, them two really played well this past season in Arkansas. And if he's currently in Emory Hunt's draft guide, but you should go and get if you haven't got that free plug right there for the Zarda playbook. He is Treylon Burks is his fifth ranked slot wide receiver. So when you look at that, he's a good player. He had a really productive career at the University of Arkansas. He was a first team All SEC, two-time second team All SEC, over 18 touchdowns in his college career. Got involved in the rushing game, got in the return game, in the punt return game, kick return game. See that he can do a little bit of everything. So if you're the Eagles, like you said, if you're looking for that guy to complement Devontae Smith, he could be that guy. But you also could possibly get Treylon Burks later in the draft. A lot of people project them in that 20-ish, around in that area. You mentioned a guy like Nakobe Dean, another great defensive, standout from the University of Georgia with him and Jordan Davis, kind of being, mano y mano in that front seven for the Bulldogs. The only thing, right, that we know what the Eagles is, boy, they actually drafted a linebacker in the first round. That's the only thing, right? It would be nice. It will be a breath of fresh air if they are able to, get a guy, like Nakobe Dean in that first round. But again, it's tough to say, right? But like you said, 15 and 18, you can't go wrong. A lot of great options, a lot of possible options. And for me, I'm with you too, right? You got to go defense, offense, right? Now it just depends on what's there. We mentioned the Kobe Dean from Georgia. There's also been a lot of people that like the Eagles to go potentially a guy like Jordan Davis in the middle of that defense. The defensive tackle out of Georgia had a real, excellent college career. Last season, for the Bulldogs, posted career highs across the board: 32 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. He can command double teams and be a playmaker and stopping the run. If you're looking for the Fletcher Cox, replacement, he could be like that replacement there as you kind of continue to build on that defensive line as Fletcher Cox entering, his last year of his deal as he restructured for a 1-year deal. I think Hargraves on his 1 year on the last year of his deal. So maybe you do explore that. And then offensively, like you said, I feel like whichever wide receiver they take, they can't go wrong. Right. Like I feel like if you get a guy, like Garrett Wilson, right, who's been kind of like fluctuating between like that 10-15 range. He's a guy who can complement Devontae Smith well. Had a breakout junior year this past season, 70 receptions for over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns. He can climb the ladder to make, tough contested catches, and can line up on the outside, and he can play some special teams. Even though I don't think you want your first round pick to be playing special teams like that, but having those abilities, I think he would be another great option. The world is their oyster there, and like I said, they can do a little bit of all, they can do a little bit of everything. But Harrison, they can also move up to potentially get a player, to get a player that they really covet. Who do you think that they could potentially move up for in this year's draft class? Because they do have 15 to 18. They have that capital where a team might feel like that might be in the top 10 said, I don't like how this board is shaking out. I'm going to give Howie Roseman a call. And if you give Roseman a call, who do you think the Eagles could potentially go for to move up for in the top 10?
It's an interesting concept. We know how he likes to make trades. We know how he's been active on draft night before. I think one guy in particular is definitely Kayvon Thibodeau. There's been an interesting kind of slide with him throughout the winter and spring months. It felt like during college football season, he was almost locked and loaded as the number one. You didn't hear as much about Aiden Hutchinson, Travon Walker out of Georgia. It was really, well, Thibodeau will probably be one, and then kind of from there, things will play out how they will. Maybe be an offensive tackle, whatever the case may be. Thibodeau has really had a bit of a slide. You kind of see him going anywhere from really like 3 to 9, 10. I mean, I've seen some people go as low as like Seattle at 9 or 10. So if that were to happen, it could be an interesting concept. I mean, the Eagles have 10 picks in this year's draft. Obviously, they have 2 first rounders next year. They've got some ammunition. They've got some, weapons to make a move. That's definitely an interesting concept for them to move up. I think there will be things for them there, though. Like if they stay put at 15 and 18, I think they could be okay. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I think moving up they would have to be really convicted about a guy, to potentially give up a first rounder in this year's draft or more draft capital later. I think having 2 first round picks could really address, because listen, this Eagles team made the playoffs last year, but we all know they still have some things they need to address. This roster is far from complete. There's a reason that they kind of, fought and clawed their way into the playoffs, didn't really have that many big wins, and then got beat pretty bad in their first round playoff appearance. Granted, against Tom Brady and the Bucs, but still, like there's some reasons that it wasn't a perfect season last year. So they've got some things to address, and I think they can do that with the 2 first round picks.
100%. And one of those first round picks will be not used on a quarterback. Sorry, folks, they will not be taking a quarterback with their first round pick. Next year might be a whole different story. But this year, not a chance at all. And looking, talking more about just the Eagles in their upcoming picks on Thursday night. Tom McShay wrote in his latest NFL Draft Buzz story that multiple executives think that Alabama wide receiver Jameson Williams is the Eagles' preference at number 15. And if not, the Saints could be his floor at number 16. So Harrison, should the Eagles, if that is their guy, should they take him at number 15, or should he take another wide receiver like we already discussed, right? There is Treylon Burks, there is Garrett Wilson. I know a lot of Eagles fans were liking, Chris Olave from Ohio State. There's also some people that like Drake London out of USC, even though I don't know Eagles fans want to, go back down to the USC wide receiver Pac-12 wide receiver route because that hasn't worked out the last couple times for them. But nevertheless, should they go after a guy like Jameson Williams, who had a really good last year for Alabama before, suffering that knee injury?
I like Jameson Williams a lot. I think minus the ACL situation, he might be one of the safest receivers in this class, just paired with his speed, his size, his athleticism, the things that he can do when the ball's in the air. Like if he's on the field, I feel like he's going to be a playmaker. Whereas some of the other guys, they have a lot of upside, but like, will they make that impact day one? You're not exactly sure. I feel like if Jameson Williams is out there and the ACL is good, he's going to be a dynamic playmaker. So real interesting Bama connection. We're seeing teams start to like to do that. A little bit off topic for the Eagles, but I've heard some things like Mac Jones and Jameson Williams. I remember they were saying that at the combine to Jameson, like, would it be cool to reunite with Mac in New England? So, but like you said, there's a lot of interesting receivers. I mean, I like Drake out of USC. He's more risky though. Like I'm saying, I like Jameson Williams as like the safer receiver. If you pick Drake London, it's a little bit more well, what are we going to get? How's his game going to translate to the NFL?
Mm-hmm.
He's killing these Pac-12 DBs. He can go up and get anything against these Pac-12 DBs. They're throwing in the ball a bunch, but the NFL is a different game. So that's an interesting one. Like I mentioned, I like Treylon Burks a lot. Garrett Wilson, real good speed guy. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I mean, Howie Roseman and the Eagles front office usually has a guy or two that they like. That they're really in the Jalen Reagor a few years ago, honestly, over Justin
Devontae
Jefferson. And
Smith.
yeah, exactly. Marcus Smith. We can go way back. Danny
Devontae Smith, not
Watkins.
Marcus Smith. No disrespect, Marcus Smith.
Nah, right. No disrespect, Marcus Smith, but let's call it like it is. Marcus Smith was projected like second or third rounder when
That
they
is
drafted him in
true.
the first
That is
round. Like,
true. We
that's a
went up and
fact.
got
I
him.
mean, it is
Yep.
what it is. So like that's kind of what would worry me with the Eagles with their 2 picks is if they really reached on someone, especially at 18. It feels like 15 they'll probably go safe get someone because they know they have 18. But if at 18 they reach and get someone, that's when it starts to get risky. So the Eagles are really one of the more interesting teams in this draft. I mean, objectively too. I know we're in this area, but objectively they have a lot of draft ammunition.
Yeah, a lot of draft ammunition, like you mentioned, for a team that got into the playoffs last season as that last wild card spot. And like you said, was a little rough around the edges against, a very experienced Tampa Bay team, but experience that they got nonetheless. And when we talk about Jameson Williams, in Emery's draft guide here, he has him. We talked about Treylon Burks as the number 5 ranked slot wide receiver. Well, Jameson Williams is the number 1 ranked slot receiver in this class. And like Emery writes in his quick blurb here, he says ridiculous speed and acceleration. Legit home run catch and run threat. One of the best kick returners in the nation. Explodes out of his breaks. Does a great job of tracking the deep ball going downfield. Has a good set of hands, and that travels well at all levels of the field. And also, despite his slender frame, he's pretty strong at the catch point as well. You hear those things, you're like, this is what the Eagles need, right? This is what they could use to go with a guy like Devontae Smith, with a Quez Watkins. He's almost, it's weird to say, right? He's almost what the Eagles hope Jalen Reagor would be.
I don't know the exact numbers and all that, but he might be a little taller than Reagor. I feel like he might have a little. Emery mentioned it, the slender frame. He might have a little bit more to his frame than Reagor.
Yeah,
too.
Reagor is 5'11", 197, and Williams is 6'1", 189.
So yeah, a tad bigger. I get what you're saying there. It is the home run threat. The guy you can throw the screens to. That's something Bama did a lot last year, was throw him some quick screens and let him go make a play. And he does. He has that home run threat. So that would be a really interesting pick for them. The ACL, it gives me a little worried, but I think he'll come back at full strength. You might have to miss him for a few weeks. You might miss some time in training camp. Definitely some time in rookie mini camp, which is like a week away.
Right.
So that'll definitely factor into the decision. That could see him slide a little bit. And I think that if he did slide, like McShay mentioned, maybe the Saints are his floor. I think if it were to be the case where he slides, someone's getting a really good player. Kind of off topic, but David Ojabo's in the same situation. Towards ACL
Right.
pro day, he's going to slide. Someone's going to get a really good pass rusher who probably should have went top 10. You know what I mean? Bearing that injury, someone might get him in the second round now. So that's always a factor. We saw it with Sidney Jones a few years ago.
Yeah, and usually teams that are contenders or in that realm will take a guy that's coming off of an injury because it's like, we don't need you to play right away. You will give you the year to have like that red shirt year and then be ready for the next possible season. So Jameson Williams is going to be an interesting case to see where does he land in Thursday night's draft, if he goes 15 to the Eagles or if he slides, or if he might go before 15. Always depends, on the amount, just on the run of wide receivers that we may see, especially in that 10 to 15 range, where you have Washington, where you have Minnesota, where you have Baltimore, Cleveland, teams that they don't necessarily need wide receivers, but if a guy's there, they could go and make that happen. So, hey, we'll definitely see how that plays out. This is the Total Sports Live podcast here on Anchor. Jovan, Alford, Harrison Brown, talking NFL draft Thursday night, first round, Friday night, Friday evening, second and third rounds for day 2, and then the all important day 3. I say that in sarcasm because I know a lot of people don't tune in to day 3 on that Saturday afternoon. Rounds 4 to 7 on on Saturday afternoon, Saturday morning, probably late morning, Saturday afternoon. But before we, talk about this year's, draft class, Harrison, and then obviously look at day 3, which is the best day of the draft outside of round 1, we got to talk about Jalen Rager and the reports that been coming out as of late, saying that from Tim McManus citing league sources that the Eagles are open to listening to offers for Jalen Rager, and McManus adds in his report that a trade could be best for both parties, as even if Rager returns to the Eagles in 2022, he won't be a primary option in the team's offense. It was also reported a couple weeks ago by Jeff Mosher inside thebirds.com that teams are interested in trading for Rager, with some calling and checking in on his availability. Mosher mentioned that the cap hit for Rager being traded is much less than what the team will owe if they decide to release him. He's currently signed to 2023 and carries about cap charges of $3.5 million and $4.2 million over the next 2 seasons. AKA, it's not that expensive to potentially move Jalen Rager. So when you hear these reports as we get closer and closer to the draft, and knowing that the Eagles are looking or could look to upgrade the wide receiver position, do you actually see the Eagles moving on from Jalen Rager, especially since they just used the first round pick on him not even a couple of years ago?
He's an interesting case. I mean, it obviously hasn't went the way they wanted, and then Justin Jefferson has really, put such a spotlight, put such a magnifying glass on the fact that Jalen Rager hasn't really had that success. I mean, Jovan, I've been a little bit easier on Jalen Rager. I still think he has a lot of upside, to be a playmaker in the NFL. I think he might not be your number one receiver. He might not be, you know what I mean, the guy that's going out there 10 catches a game, 150 yards, but he's got some home run threat. He can return some kicks. He can make some plays. So I think the Eagles would definitely be taking a loss on what they spent on him. I mean, they got to know that going into it. They're not getting anything close to a first or second round compensation back. We were talking before, we started this live, and the thought is third or fourth rounder, late third round, maybe fourth rounder. And I mean, like, even we don't know what the opposing GMs are thinking. Like, even that could be high to what the Eagles are hearing. So that'll be really interesting. If they go receiver early, there's something to be said for it. I think him not being the number one option might be a good thing. Him not being the number 2 or the number 3 option might be a good thing. Let him focus on returning kicks, making some plays, in 4 wide situations, put him in the slot, put him in some different spots. Granted, they have Zach Pascal now as well, who I'm very high on. Now, I think he might take some of Jalen Rager's minutes as well. Like, if we're just looking at who the objectively better football, better
And
receivers.
Quez Watkins has completely outplayed him.
Definitely, 100%. I mean, you kind of go into the year thinking Quez Watkins is the starting slot, bearing whatever they do in the draft. That could change some things. But, yeah, Rager's, I mean, it's tough, man. Philly, they've been tough on Rager, no doubt. He's definitely earned some of it. The play hasn't been there. The drops against the Giants. I mean, we can go through the list, but he's still young. He's so young at this point. Jalen Rager is like 22, 23 years old. There's so much time for him to really kind of get his feet in the NFL and do some good things. So I'm not out on Rager at all. I think he could do things. It might not be here. It might be one of those situations. He might have to go somewhere else. That's completely possible. But I think he can make plays in the NFL somewhere.
Yeah, most definitely. Like you said, the Eagles they have to, like you said, they have to be content with not getting, high value back. You're not going to get a strong return on your investment, right? You have to be content with, like you said, getting a fourth, maybe that compensatory, a team that has a compensatory third round pick, saying, yeah, we'll throw something at them, see what we can do with them. Because if you're another team trading for him, the good news is he's still under contract for a couple of years. So before you have to exercise his 5th-year option. So it could be a win-win, for both sides, for both parties, especially because things haven't really worked out. Some to his detriment, but others just to where he was drafted and the receivers around him, right? Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Ayuk, right? Just that core 3 right there have outplayed Rager to this point. So again, we'll see what happens if the Eagles do move on from Rager. You know where you'll hear it first. You'll read it on TotalSportsLive.com as well. So Eagles, we'll see what happens there. And let's talk about and move on to the next phase of the NFL draft. And is this year's quarterback class, Harrison. This year's quarterback class has been slandered, I say, to the fullest extent. And I don't understand why. Let me not say I don't understand why. I do understand why, because everybody's, you know, hell bent on looking for that franchise guy. They're looking for the next Herbert. They're looking for the next Mahomes. You know, they're looking for the next Lamar, even though some people don't want the next Lamar, but we'll get into that. They're looking for that next guy, and a lot of people believe that this class doesn't necessarily have this guy, which I don't think that's necessarily the case. You are a former quarterback. You've watched a lot of quarterback film. You went to the Hula Bowl, got to see some quarterbacks up close in person as well. You have your own, quarterback rankings and things of that nature. What do you think about this class? Because I think there is good guys in this class, like Malik Willis, like a Carson Strong, like a Desmond Ritter, like a Caleb Ellaby. There's a lot of Kill Glass. There's a lot of good guys in this year's draft class. Maybe not superstardom right away, but there are some guys. So what do you think about this class? And also, do our perceptions about quarterbacks have to change when it comes to drafting them?
Yeah, I actually like this class. I think it's a deep class. I think there's more guys than people are kind of expecting that'll come out of it and wind up, seeing some meaningful NFL time from it. I think that you look at kind of just a block of four guys: Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ritter, Sam Howell. I mean, I think those guys probably see time either at some point in their rookie year or their second year. I think those guys wind up starting meaningful games in the NFL. And I think that there's more than that too. You mentioned a lot of guys there. Keel Glass, Cole Kelly's guy I really liked from the Hula Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
EJ Perry has had a great pre-draft process and did some great things in the Ivy League. We'll get into him later. You mentioned Ellaby. Like there's some guys, Levi Lewis. So I think, if you kind of get past well, there might not be a superstar guy, and I might object to that because I like Malik Willis a lot. I think if Malik Willis gets in the right system with the right people, put
That's
an
the
offensive
key.
line in front of him, maybe a little bit of a run game, like things could get really interesting. I think Kenny Pickett can come in and win games on the right team. Like I think if it wound up being Kenny Pickett fell to 20, and Pittsburgh drafted him, I think with that team, with some of the playmakers they have, with their offensive line, with that defense, you could win 9 games in his rookie year. He has some experience winning early in his career as a true freshman. Pickett was a starter, beat teams like Miami. He played so many games at Pitt.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it's in that 40 to
He
50
was a
range.
true 4 year starter.
He
True
was a
4 year
true
starter.
four-year starter at Pitt. There's something to be said for that. I really like the coach that he's worked out with in the offseason, Coach Raz, Coach Tony from Test Football. He has a really good background of guys that he's worked with, and they've been working together for years. Coach Tony and Kenny, they've been working together close to maybe his whole college career. It's been quite a while. So I like Kenny Pickett. I think that this quarterback class has definitely gotten a bad rap, and I think that there will probably be more hype on Thursday. I think that people will come around on some of these guys when maybe their team picks them, and they're like, all right, well, let's see what we got. But this is going to be an interesting quarterback class. This will be one to watch. Like I said, it's not as flashy as maybe some in the past, but I'll also counter Jovan. You said a few minutes ago some of those names. Guys like Mahomes, Mitch Trubisky went in front of him. Guys like Herbert, Tua went in front of him. Like
Yep.
there have been guys like this in the past where the draft analysis misses. Lamar went 32nd. I don't remember
Yep.
exactly all the quarterbacks that went in front of him. Sam Darnold, Rosen,
Baker Mayfield,
Baker. You know what I mean? Like if you go back and change that today,
Josh
Lamar might be
Allen
the first
went
quarterback in
before
that.
him too.
Yeah, maybe Josh Allen, but Lamar should be right in there, 1-2.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a pre-draft error. So these things happen. I mean, who knows? Sam Howell could be a superstar. Carson Strong could be a really good quarterback. Funny things happen in the NFL. Guys need a good opportunity. They need a good situation. You mentioned, should we change the way we evaluate quarterbacks? I mean, yes. I mean, first of all, the evaluations have changed just in the last few years. The window. Josh Rosen got like a season. Tua was on the hot seat after a few bad games, and they won a lot of games this year.
Shoot, Jalen Hurts was under the microscope
Jalen
this
Hurts is
season,
under it.
only his
You
first
mentioned it
year
earlier.
starting.
No quarterback for the Eagles in the first round. I'm with you there. Maybe something late, 5, 6, whatever. If they want, you know what I mean. If they want to do their quarterback factory thing, I
Mm-hmm.
get it. Could open up Gardner getting traded, but that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, I like this quarterback class. I think there's some guys in it. I think there's going to be a lot of guys that wind up starting, a lot of quality backups. And us, we'll talk about alternative leagues like XFL, USFL, CFL. There's quarterbacks from this class that'll wind up playing other places. And this is just a broader draft class look as a whole. But the COVID year, I think, really made this class super strong. A lot of guys took that extra year of eligibility after the weird year in 2020. Like some FCS teams didn't play till the spring. That was just a weird year. Most colleges granted their seniors some extra eligibility. And that's coming into this class. There's going to be a lot of guys, day three, undrafted free agents, that are super talented players that might just get overlooked because this class, there's just a lot. There's a lot of volume in this class. It's a very deep class. Like we've been saying, maybe it's not the most superstar loaded class, but there's going to be a lot of playmakers from this 2022 class.
And sometimes that's okay, right? If it's not superstar loaded, because you could end up finding a lot of quality, guys, right? You mentioned the UDFA period, right? I'm thinking about some team might find the next Tyler Huntley, right? Tyler Huntley had a really good collegiate career at Utah, didn't get drafted, been on the Ravens practice squad for a couple of years. We just saw what he did this year in spot starts. He was prepared and ready to go. So those type of guys are out there, right? The Tyler Huntleys of the world are, are sitting out there. And like you said, guys will be playing elsewhere, right? They'll be playing in the USFL, they'll be playing in XFL, they'll be playing in CFL. So these guys are going to make noise not only at quarterback, at wide receiver. This class is so loaded at wide receiver, like we're going to talk about soon, and that it's probably going to be as loaded as that DK, AJ Brown, you know, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson class, where there was just value just all up and down the board, even to where the Giants lucked up and got something out of Darius Slayton in like the 5th round. So there's going to be, like you said, that COVID year has helped so that there is value that could be had elsewhere in the draft. Is just putting these guys in the right situations. And you mentioned a couple of guys, right? You mentioned Sam Howell. He didn't have the greatest year this season. Only completed 62%, 62.5% of his passes for 3,056 yards, 24 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. He was a threat on the running game. He definitely put in some work on the ground. Over 800 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns on the ground, which was just crazy. But it was a significant drop passing wise from what he was in 2020, where he really just set the world on fire. It seemed like completion percentage out of this world, close to 70%, had 30 touchdowns, only 7 interceptions. Not really a threat on the ground game, but that's because he had, Javonte Williams and Michael Carter there. Then wide receivers in 2020, he had Daz Newsome and Diami Brown as well flanking him. So when you look at the case of Sam Howell, do you think that his draft, like people not talking about him, is more so because of how he didn't have necessarily the same caliber of players that he had in 2020, because all the guys we listed all got drafted.
You even go back to Sam Howell's freshman year, and he had a ridiculously good freshman year. I know he set some records, and like you mentioned, that 2020 team was absolutely loaded for North Carolina. And Sam Howell did. He had a bit of a drop off this year. I'll counter it. Like you said, that running ability was unbelievable this year. He can seriously run people over from the quarterback position, literally lower his shoulder and make a play, especially in the red zone. That's super valuable for teams. Young quarterbacks, it's tough to make plays in that red zone. Things get tight, windows get small. You can run people over or jump over a pile to get in for 7. That's going to help you out early. It is interesting. Like we mentioned, there's not one superstar, but I feel like Sam Howell kind of got lost in this class a little bit. People are talking about Matt Corral. Obviously, Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett are kind of 1 and 2. Desmond Ridder in Cincinnati had such an explosive year this year. So I feel like Sam Howell's gotten lost a little bit, but I think he definitely could be a quality NFL quarterback. He kind of reminds me of Baker. They look alike on the field. They kind of have the same throwing motion, same kind of stature. Sam Howell's probably a little bit more, he definitely is more talented runner at this point than where Baker is. Baker had some ability in college, but we've kind of seen at this point Baker's more of a pocket guy. So I think his team would be getting someone good in Sam Howell. Most of the mocks have him kind of in that round 2 range, but 32 to the Lions, I've heard crazier things. Late in that first round, if somebody wanted to move back up to get Sam Howell in that 25 to 27 range, I wouldn't think that was crazy at all.
Yeah, it's not crazy, especially when you look at teams, like maybe in Indianapolis, right? They have Matt Ryan for a couple of years, but they do need that heir apparent. So maybe they move up, right? Or I don't know if they have a second. I know they have a third from the Carson Wentz trade, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe
Yep.
they take a chance on a guy like Sam Howell or Desmond Ritter, who a lot of people, think, is the most pro-ready quarterback in this class. I think I've heard Emery, talk glowingly about a guy like Desmond Ritter, another, guy that's started a lot of games and that, played a lot of good football. So Desmond Ritter is another of them. And then, like you said, Malik Willis, a guy who could be that superstar, right? And people won't give him the credit because he went to Liberty. He played at Liberty for the last 2 seasons. But the things that he did on the football field at Liberty with his arm, with his athleticism, his ability to be a +1 in the run game, I mean, man, I think people don't understand how good he is because I don't think they necessarily watch Liberty a lot this year, but he can sling it and he can just be just an absolute playmaker. And like you said, it's all about situation, right? Like if he ends up, and this is, I don't think it's going to happen, but Lord, if it happens, it'd be crazy. Could you imagine him in Detroit? We're talking Detroit where he has TJ Hawkinson, right? He has Amon-Ra St. Brown, Josh Reynolds, DJ Chark, DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams on that offense. The offensive line's not horrible.
Panay
They got
Sewell.
Panay Sewell, right?
Yep.
They got, other guys on the offensive line. That would be scary, and he wouldn't need to play right away either.
I don't think it would be crazy for him to go at 2. Like, I know that's not, the most commonly mocked thing, but his upside, his potential, kind of where the Lions are right now, I don't think it would be absurd at all for Malik Willis to go second. I think
Because
he
Jared
has
Goff didn't do anything special last year.
exactly. And like you mentioned, you know what? If you want to give Jared Goff another year, all right, bring him back out there, let Malik Willis kind of develop on the bench. But I think Malik Willis is going to be one of those guys where he's just too talented to keep off the field. And it's just kind of one of those situations where whoever the incumbent is, wherever he goes, Malik Willis is going to be lighting things up in the preseason. Obviously, he's going to have a high draft pick to his name. So, yeah. And you mentioned, people might be kind of sleeping on Liberty. They're FBS now. Liberty's not FCS school anymore. They played Ole Miss this year. They played some legit competition. Obviously, Willis and Corral went head-to-head, 1 week. I think Malik Willis, the argument you can have with that is maybe he wasn't playing around the best players, so that kind of makes his evaluation a little bit tougher. You're like, well, how good is his offensive line? How good are his receivers? But I think Malik Willis, the sky's the limit. I think he could really do a lot of good things in the NFL. And another thing about that, not to go too deep into the college process, but he started at Auburn. If you really want to be like, all right, well, Liberty's not a good enough school to play at. He transferred to Liberty from Auburn. So if you need that SEC stamp, which obviously I don't think should be how it is, but hey, if you need that, he started his career at Auburn, transferred to Liberty, did great things there, has lit up the pre-draft process. I think he has all the upside in the world.
He definitely has all the upside in the world. And to Pete Prisco, he's not a running back. Just want to say that he's not a running back. He's a quarterback. He can throw. We got to stop throwing these coded language words around when we're talking about the black quarterback and his ability to run. He's going to be a very good. He's definitely going to be a very good quarterback in the NFL. I think when I think about it more, he could be in a situation where it was almost like, and I'm not comparing him to this guy. Please don't get it twisted. What I'm about to say, it almost reminds me of when Patrick Mahomes had to sit for year one. He had to sit behind Alex Smith, and eventually they put him in. The talent started to show and it started to evolve. It could be the same thing for Malik Willis wherever he goes, because he could go to Detroit at number 2. He could go to Pittsburgh at number 20. He could go to Atlanta at number 8. Remember, Mariota's only on a 2-year deal. If you want to get the future with Kyle Pitts, could do it there.
Washington, maybe. I know that you wanted on Carson, but
I don't know if Carson Wentz wants that in the background.
Listen,
I mean, I get what you're saying. That would be scary.
Carson's not that proven.
No,
I get it. He's got some years under his belt, but what have we seen on film the last 3-4 years? Like, they got to think about it. They got to think about it.
Definitely do. So I can't wait to see how it shakes out when it comes to this year's, quarterback class, who goes where, who's going to get selected where, because there's going to be that one quarterback that somehow gets into the first round. Will it be a Sam Howell? Will it be a Desmond Ritter that sneaks up into that first round? It's going to be fun, to watch, throughout this entire draft weekend. And before we wrap up, we want to just appreciate everybody that will be tuning into this podcast, checking it out on all the various streaming platforms, checking out Total Sports Live, .com, just doing everything. Really appreciate everybody checking out the pod and giving the ratings, reviews, all that good stuff. Really appreciate it. And before we wrap, we got to talk about our last topic of this show, and that is day 3, round 8, UDFA period. Many fans, as we know, Harrison, they focus primarily on day 1 of the NFL draft. However, we've seen over the years that teams can find that talent on day 3. The Eagles have been very good finding some of that talent on day 3. They found a guy named Jason Kelsey in day 3. It's kind of, it panned out for him. Todd Harriman's, Trent Cole. I mean, Brent Selleck, you can find them, right? They're there. You just gotta find them and develop them. There's other places and other things and other players that have been found in that day 3, even at round 8, UDFA period. We just mentioned one in Tyler Huntley. Um, Starting with you, just who are some guys that people and fans should keep an eye out for that could hear their names called in that day 3 range, or even if they don't get day 3, right, they're going to be one of the first players that we see getting picked up on a UDFA circuit when we start seeing those reports coming out of this guy got signed to join this team.
Yeah, I think day 3 is going to be the best day of the draft this year. I think it's super loaded. I think, like I kind of mentioned
Yep.
earlier, there's just a lot of volume in this class. There's just a lot of guys. Some guys that I really like: Trey Gross, a receiver out of Delaware State, real physical, can go up and make a play on the ball. Real good athlete, tested well at Delaware's pro day a few months ago. I think that he might be a UDFA guy who comes into camp and just wows people. Between his athleticism, he's going to be a good special teams guy. I really like Trey Gross. James Houston, edge rusher, linebacker out of Jackson State. Coach Prime, Coach Deion Sanders said this week that he kind of reminds him of Michael Parsons because he legit has that linebacker ability. He has that ability to be that down linebacker, go stuff in the run game. But he also is a real pass rusher. He's a guy with great moves, great get off, very explosive. I think his pass rushing is going to really be what translates to the NFL. I think that linebacker role, it's a lot tougher. There's a lot of things going on at the NFL. Those offensive linemen are all 6'5", 350, but I think he's going to do a real good job off that edge, coming off the edge, being a speed rusher. Mentioned him earlier, Ivy League quarterback EJ Perry. Been impressed with his game since 2019. Me and Nick Earnshaw had the opportunity to catch that Brown Penn game in 2019 before the pandemic and all that. Earlier in his career, real talented guy, good accuracy, smooth footwork, great athlete. There's been some just rumors recently, really, that he kind of fits that Taysom Hill mold, which I hadn't even thought of, having seen his game.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see a team trying to use him in interesting ways, trying to get him out off the edge as design QB runs and things like that. But don't sleep on EJ Perry's arm as well. I know Taysom Hill gets a lot of slack for not having a great arm. I think EJ Perry has an NFL arm. If Taysom Hill doesn't, I think EJ Perry definitely does. Someone from the Hula Bowl that really caught my eye while I was down there was AJ Arcuri, offensive tackle out of Michigan State. He's a guy who had a lot of NFL scouts checking in on him. He was probably one of the top offensive tackles at the Hula Bowl. Definitely a real sound pass blocker. Has that prototypical size. He looks like that starting left tackle, starting right tackle for an NFL team. Played at Michigan State, went up against guys like Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo, didn't look out of place at all. And those are two of the top pass rushers in this class. Mentioned Ojabo earlier with the injury, but that's pre-injury that he's facing Ojabo. And obviously we all know what Aiden Hutchinson is. So I like AJ a lot. I think he's going to be a guy who maybe it's not right away, maybe it's not year one. He might spend a year on the practice squad, but I think he starts game at tackle. Try to go rapid fire through a few more of these here. Jeremiah Tyler, outside linebacker out of Princeton, was used a lot out of blitzes packages for them. He's going to probably go in that UDFA range, but I think he should definitely get into camp. I don't know if he's kind of in that range right now, but I think he should be in an NFL camp. Brad Hawkins, safety out of Michigan from Camden, New Jersey, went to Camden High. Got to shout out the Jersey guys. I think he's going to be a really good player. I think he set the program record at Michigan for defensive starts at safety. Dax Hill has gotten a lot of love at safety out of Michigan as like a first round guy. Brad Hawkins is more in that seventh round. I think Brad Hawkins is going to wind up being that top available player at some point, and a team's going to go ahead and pick him. Aaron Hainsford, linebacker out of Texas A&M, always around the ball, great pursuit. And then I'll wrap up Andrew Ogletree, Jaws' guy out of Youngstown State, caught a touchdown in the Hula Bowl. 6'7", about 250, 260, long catch radius. I think he's going to be a guy who can make plays from that tight end position in the NFL.
I like it. I like it. And if you didn't catch all those names, best believe it when draft weekend does come around. When we get to day 3, if those guys haven't get selected, we'll definitely tweet out a list of guys that are best available. We'll likely do that as we get out of day 1. We'll list some of the guys that we talked about on this podcast as best available for day 2, best available for day 3, just so you can keep an eye out and keep on your own checklist of players that to keep an eye out for. And for me, just some of the guys, for me, Kansas State quarterback Skylar Thompson. I've been a really big fan of his for the last couple of years. He's kind of, he hasn't had the best college career just because based off of injury, but he had a very good, from everything I've seen, he had a very good all-star circuit. And I think a guy that could hear his name, I think people, said between, rounds 4 and 5, you could hear his name called. So Skylar Thompson, a dual threat guy, can do it in the passing game, but also in the running game. That's someone to keep an eye out for. I was going to break him down further, but I don't have my notebook with me that has his notes. Like I said, I was looking at Skylar Thompson, not even last year, the year before last. So I have notes on that from a couple of years ago that I don't have with me. So that's a guy I'm looking forward to seeing where he goes. Another guy, another quarterback, we talked about him, Alabama A&M quarterback Akil Glass. I think he was 14th all time in FCS passing. I mean, the dude's a playmaker. Had an incredible, spring season for Alabama A&M. Didn't rest on his laurels this year. Had a very good, year this past year for the Bulldogs. I think he was in the NFLPA Bowl, if I'm not mistaken. So he did the circuit. I think he was in the HBCU Legacy Bowl too, as well. So he's made the circuit, and he's a well-known name. So don't be surprised if you hear his name in day 3. To be honest with you, if he goes undrafted, it will be a surprise.
I would be very surprised.
That's how good he is. Another guy we talked about him, Levi Lewis out of Louisiana Lafayette. As Emery says, he's a point guard. He's a point guard on the field, and that's when you watch him. He might be small in stature, but he can throw that ball. He can move in the pocket. Make plays down the field with his arm, but also with his legs. Another guy definitely to keep your eye out on for. And 2 wide receivers. Got to start off with this guy who I've enjoyed watching the last couple of years on some West Coast late night football. Romeo Dubs out of Nevada. Him and Carson Strong had a very good connection over these last 2 years. If you were watching Nevada, you were pretty much watching either Carson Strong throw it to Cole Turner, or he was throwing it to Romeo Dobbs. And Dubs, I had a chance to go back and rewatch some of his film yesterday before we recorded this podcast, and there were just a lot of things that stood out to me. He's had a very productive career. Last 2 years have been outstanding. Over 1,000 yards last 2 seasons, 20 total receiving touchdowns. I mean, he is the number 1 wide receiver for him, right? He played well. He's played in a spread offense. I think that's pretty much across the board. Everybody's playing spread, but he can line up inside or outside primarily. He can stretch the field. He does a good job catching with his hands, in my opinion. When I say that, I mean the wide receivers not letting the ball, hit him in the chest. They're catching it with their hands. For me, also I he can get separation one-on-one in man coverage. He didn't run his 40 at the NFL Combine, so we don't have a 40 time for him. But if you watched him, get vertical, take the top off the defense, he can get that separation one-on-one on man coverage. So I like that. I think he is a solid route runner. Can get better at it, but I think he does have some of the basics down. Does an adequate job in breaking on the end routes for catches, which I really loved to see out of him. Better run blocker. That's always a big thing for me for a wide receiver, especially playing in spread offenses. Are you run blocking? Can you do it? Are you okay? Can you be at least adequate doing it? So could be better in that. But I think, he does a good job of tracking the ball in the air. And he does sometimes show the extra gear on the after catches. We'd like to see that more. But I think this is a guy who you can see in that day 3 range. In my Eagles mock draft, I had him going to the Eagles in the 5th round. That would be, pretty cool if that actually happened to get a player like him. But that's another guy to keep an eye out for. Another guy, just off top of my head, Clemson wide receiver Justin Ross. A lot of people aren't talking about him. He didn't play last season due to a neck injury, but before he suffered that neck injury, he was like really good. We're talking like up there with T. Higgins. Like he was that dude before he got hurt. So I'm actually going to be interested to see where he goes because I think a lot of people aren't talking about him. But if he's anything like the player that we saw before injury, he could be something special if he gets into the right system. And then my last guy is coming out the FCS. We've talked a lot about some FCS guys on this show today. Nichols wide receiver Dejon Dixon. This was a guy who I randomly just found his video cut ups on this YouTube page. I was looking at other guys, and then I saw him. And I was like, "Yo, who's this guy?" He's 6'4", 200 pounds. Top target for Lindsey Scott, who played really well at Nichols last season. I think he transferred this year. This all season, 2021, 71 receptions for over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, 4.62 40-yard dash, which honestly is not bad for a 6'4", 200 guy. He can fly. He can get open. He had 35 receiving touchdowns in college. If you look at Emory Hunt's scouting guide, he's the 4th split wide receiver behind. Check this out where Emory has him ranked behind George Pickens, Chris Olave, and Drake London. So that's how much Emory thinks of Dejon Dixon, and I can see it. He's a huge target. We talk about catch radius. You could just throw it up to him. He's going to get it. He can stretch the field. He's going to make the tough catches over the middle, which, bigger guys not known for that, at his size, but he's comfortable doing it. He doesn't have the quickest first step, but that's okay because he can get that separation there. He's athletic. Like I said, mismatch in the red zone. He doesn't move like a 6'4" wide receiver. When I see him, I don't know, Harrison might disagree with me or not. I see Alshon Jeffrey, AJ Green light. I don't necessarily. I could see a little bit of their games mixed in. Not saying that he's him, he's them, but I could see it. So those are just a few of my guys that that I'm looking out for in day 3 of the NFL draft.
I see what you're talking about there with Dixon being a little bit of that Alshon, especially Alshon with the Bears. Because when Alshon came to the Eagles, he was a little bit of a step slower. I think you might even be able to make a case that Dixon might have a better frame than both of those guys.
Yes, yes.
He's a little bit leaner than Alshon and a little bit bigger than AJ. Dixon's going to be a really interesting prospect. I just remember his explosiveness, the way that he gets off the ball, the way he gets off the line of scrimmage. I could definitely see him doing real well. And I want to give a shout out to some of our TSL draft podcast guys real quick. KD, Kaylon Davis from Arkansas Pine Bluff did some real good things at the HBC Legacy Bowl. I think he's going to make a team really happy as that day 3 UDFA round. Kyer Bynum, physical safety from Carson Newman. I think he's going to be a really good player. He mentioned when we were talking to him that Pittsburgh liked him. I think that would be a great connection. And then our guy, Josh Taylor, who right now is with the Sioux Falls Storm, was drafted by the Michigan Panthers in the USFL. Definitely just wishing all those guys the best of luck. Lonnie Moore from Monmouth, real talented receiver I had a chance to interview. And then Prince Emili, defensive tackle from Penn as well. So just want to give a shout out to those guys, man. We're definitely, wishing everybody the best in this draft process.
Most definitely rooting for all their successes and everybody, dreams that come true, whether you're drafted or even if you're a UDFA, just being able to have that chance. And even if it's not an NFL, right? USFL, CFL, XFL, IFL, if you're playing the game of football, it's going to be a great weekend for you. And like we said, before we wrap, like we said, for everything NFL draft, Eagles, whatever, totalsportslive.com. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at totalsportslive. Follow Harrison on Twitter at Harry Brown-Russo. Follow me on Twitter at Jovan10. We're going to break it down for you. Don't worry. After the draft is over, we collect our thoughts. We'll definitely recap everything that happened with the Eagles. Might have to get some, guests on. We'll work on that. Was trying to fit that in, but hey, they're busy people too. As you see, they're flying around getting their draft interviews in. So why not have them come on after the fact so we can talk a little bit about what we talked about on this week's show. I think that's about it, Harrison. I think we wrapped up all our loose ends on this part.
I'm good. I like this draft class. That's how I want to leave off this podcast. This was a fun one. Always a pleasure doing these with you, Joe. But yeah, I like the quarterback class and I like the draft class as a whole. I think people should stop panicking.
Yeah, don't panic at all. Just relax. Let these guys, before you start going crazy and saying draft grade F, D, C, A, B, let it play out. Let these guys get a preseason, get on the field, get through year one, year two before we start making innocuous, rush to judgment type things. But that's going to wrap up this week's podcast. Appreciate everybody tuning in as well. And that will be tuning into this podcast. We'll be back one of these days to break down the draft and eventually talk about those Sixers, depending on what happens with them. Don't know what's going to
Fingers
happen with them.
crossed.
Fingers crossed there's not a game 7, but Lord knows it might go 7. And we got to talk about those Phillies too. So, hey, a lot of stuff to talk about. We'll be back. More podcasts coming soon. Total Sports Live podcast. Me and Harrison. Everyone have a good one, and we will talk to you guys very soon.